God told me to warn you. Chosen one, this is not a normal moment. And this is not a message you stumbled into by accident. You are going to need to sit down, breathe, and listen with your spirit wide open. Because what heaven is about to announce over your life is big. This is not small favor. This is not a minor adjustment. This is not a little burst of encouragement to help you survive one more night. No, this is a line being drawn in the spirit between what was and what is about to begin. The Lord is saying that the season you have been living in cannot continue the way it has been. The delay, the pressure, the confusion, the hidden tears, the warfare that made no sense, the doors that would not open, the prayers that seemed to hang in silence. None of it was random, and none of it was wasted. You thought you were enduring a long ending. But heaven says you were standing inside a divine transition. You thought you were being ignored. But God says you were being marked. You thought you were buried under the weight of waiting. But in the courts of heaven you were being set apart, sealed, and prepared as someone carrying more than an ordinary assignment. You are not just another person trying to make it through life. You are not just someone hoping things get better. You are a chosen vessel. You have been called, separated, and reserved for holy purpose. And that is exactly why the battle around your life has been so intense. The enemy does not fight empty people this hard. Hell does not spend this much energy on someone with no destiny attached to their obedience. What has come against you came against you because something on your life is costly, dangerous to darkness, and impossible to replace. Hear this clearly. God is not merely about to comfort you, He is about to move you. He is about to interrupt patterns that have lasted too long. He is about to confront cycles that tried to define you. He is about to step into places that looked dead, delayed, and sealed shut, and announce that His timing, not your pain, will have the final word. Chosen one. The Lord says, the old labels are breaking. The old season is losing its hold. The old language of fear, disqualification, and disappointment cannot narrate where you are going. You have cried enough under what was. You have bent low enough under what was. You have questioned enough under what was. And now, heaven is releasing a warning and a promise. At the same time, do not keep thinking like the version of you that only knew survival, because you are approaching a shift that will require agreement, readiness, and bold faith. There are moments when God whispers, and then there are moments when He speaks with thunder because the hour is too serious for half attention. C.S. Lewis once described pain as God's megaphone to wake a deaf world. And chosen one. That is why this season became so loud, because heaven refused to let you sleep through the moment before your turning point. The pressure was not proof of abandonment. It was proof that something had to break. Something had to wake up. Something had to come alive in you before the next door opened. This is why you have felt such holy unrest. This is why ordinary reassurance no longer works. This is why your spirit has been sensing that something is shifting, even when your circumstances have not caught up yet. God is telling you now, what is coming is bigger than what you asked for when you were only praying from pain. He is not preparing a small patch for your exhausted heart. He is preparing movement. He is preparing separation. He is preparing divine acceleration. He is preparing to distinguish your before from your after in a way that even you will not be able to deny. And because this word is not casual, your response cannot be casual either. If this is bearing witness in your spirit, if something inside you is trembling because you know heaven is speaking directly to you, Then comment right now, "I am chosen, and I will not miss my hour." Declare it like someone coming into agreement with the voice of God over their life. Like this message, subscribe to this channel, and share it with someone else who needs this warning before their season shifts. Because what comes next will show you why the silence was never empty, it was sacred. You need to hear this with absolute clarity. Heaven did not lose sight of you in the wilderness. The God who formed you has watched every silent battle, every exhausted prayer. Every night you held yourself together in private while appearing strong in public. Not one tear disappeared into the ground unnoticed. Not one sigh dissolved into the dark without being heard. What felt invisible on earth was fully seen in heaven. The Lord says that the place you called abandonment was often the very place where He kept you closest. You mistook silence for distance. But it was not distance. It was depth. It was the kind of holy hiddenness where God does His most serious work, away from applause, away from noise, away from the opinions of people who could never understand what He placed on your life. There were days when you watched others move forward while you remained in what felt like the same painful chapter. Others celebrated, announced, arrived, married, built, advanced, and smiled in the light, while you stood in the shadows wondering whether your name had been forgotten. You did your best to bless them. You tried to keep your heart clean. You smiled when it hurt. You said the right things. But underneath that faithfulness, there was a question you barely dared to say aloud. Lord, did you pass me by? And heaven answers that question now with force no. He did not pass you by. He kept His hand on you when you could not feel it. He preserved you when you thought you were only barely surviving. He hid you because what is marked by God cannot always be exposed too early. Look at Hagar in the wilderness. She was cast out, emptied, and left in a place that looked like rejection. From every human angle, it seemed finished. It seemed harsh. It seemed like the story had narrowed into despair. But it was there, in that dry and desolate place, that the God who sees revealed Himself to her. He did not arrive too late. He arrived at the exact moment her strength ran out, and He opened her eyes to what had already been provided nearby. That is the word over your life. Right now, what you thought was the proof that everything was over may become the very place where God reveals what He had already prepared. The wilderness was not sent to erase you. It exposed your need, stripped away false security, and positioned you for an encounter you would never have had if life had remained comfortable. That is why this season hurt so deeply. The Lord was not dealing with the surface. He was touching the roots. He was confronting the places where you had tied your identity to outcomes, people, timing, and visible progress. He was teaching you to live under His gaze instead of human recognition. He was showing you that being hidden is not the same as being discarded. Being delayed is not the same as being denied. Being broken before Him is not the same as being abandoned by Him. In fact, some of the deepest evidence of His nearness appears when every earthly support is removed and His voice becomes the only thing holding you together. That is why your story cannot be measured by public milestones alone. Heaven measures differently. Heaven watches who keeps praying when nothing changes. Heaven watches who still bows when no reward is visible. Heaven watches who refuses to let bitterness take root when disappointment has every reason to harden the heart. And that has been your hidden offering. You were not doing nothing. You were becoming someone. You were being shaped into a vessel that does not collapse when external comfort disappears. You were learning how to hear God in dry places, trust Him in unanswered places, and remain faithful in unseen places. That kind of formation is expensive. And it does not happen in shallow seasons. It happens in the wilderness. It happens in the tension. It happens where pride dies and dependence becomes real. So no, heaven has not ignored you. Heaven has been dealing with you too personally, too carefully, too deeply to abandon you now. And if the wilderness has been this sacred, then what comes after it will have to carry a weight your old self could never have handled. That is why the next part matters. Because the delay was never empty time, it was consecration. What you called delay, heaven called consecration. What you thought was a cruel pause was, in truth, a holy process. The Lord did not leave you standing still because He had nothing to say. He held you in place because He was dealing with things too deep to rush. You were asking for movement, but God was working on weight. You were asking for the door, but He was working on the person who would be able to walk through it without falling apart on the other side. This is why the season cut so deeply. It was not casual discomfort. It was not random frustration. It was surgery. It was the hand of God going beneath the surface, touching motives, fears, attachments, and hidden wounds that could not be allowed to rule your next season. Joseph is the pattern here. He was given a dream from God, but the dream did not carry him straight into fulfillment. First came the pit, then came betrayal, then came slavery, then came false accusation, then came prison. From the outside, everything in Joseph's life looked like contradiction. The promise said one thing, but the process said another. The word from God said elevation, but his reality said confinement. And yet none of those dark places meant the dream had failed. They meant heaven was taking the dream seriously. God would not place Joseph in a seat of authority while pride, immaturity, pain, and human impulse were still left unchecked. The prison was not proof of rejection, it was proof of preparation. In the same way, what felt like a chain around your life was often the mercy of God refusing to release you too early. There were doors you begged for that would have damaged you. There were people you pleaded to keep who would have slowed your obedience and weakened your discernment. There were timelines you thought were perfect that would have bound you to a version of yourself too fragile to carry what is coming now. That is why the Lord let certain things fall through your hands. Not because He was cruel, because He was precise. Because He loved your future enough to deny your impatience. Because He saw what you could not see. The waiting was not wasted time. It was where your inner life was being brought into alignment with the magnitude of your calling. Some desires had to be purified. Some illusions had to die. Some forms of dependence had to be broken. God was not just delaying an event. He was transforming a vessel. And that kind of work is holy, slow, and severe. C.S. Lewis wrote of the collapse of old settled happiness. And that is exactly what this season has felt like for many, the loss of familiar comfort before the birth of something truer. So if everything felt stripped down, it is because heaven was clearing the ground. God does not build enduring things on unstable foundations. And now that the hidden work has gone this deep, you need to understand what that means. When God finally says move, He will not move in fragments. He will move with force. If this part is speaking directly to your spirit, don't just listen quietly, respond in faith. Comment right now. My delay was consecration. Declare it with boldness. Let heaven see your agreement. And if you know someone who is losing strength in a long process, share this message with them, because they need to hear that God has not been punishing them, He has been preparing them. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me, because the next part may be the confirmation you have been waiting for. When God decides the hidden season has done its work, He does not always announce the next move gently. Sometimes He moves with a speed that startles the very person who prayed for change. That is the kind of hour this is. You are not approaching a soft adjustment. You are approaching a suddenly, and a divine suddenly is not a dramatic phrase meant to excite you for a moment. It is the collision point between heaven's timing and your obedience. It is the moment when years of restraint, silence, and inward preparation begin to break open into visible motion. Joshua stood at the Jordan with a people who had heard promises for years, yet the river did not part while they stood back analyzing it. The waters moved when the feet of the priests stepped in. That is how God often works. He waits until obedience becomes visible. He waits until faith takes form. He waits until you stop demanding proof before movement and choose instead to move because He has spoken. This is why the next season will require a different version of you. Not the one who keeps negotiating with fear. Not the one who delays every step until all uncertainty is gone. Not the one who says yes in prayer but no in action. The suddenly of God does not arrive to entertain you. It arrives to test whether your spirit is willing to move at the speed of His instruction. That is why heaven has been doing so much internal work in you. If acceleration came too early, you would have mistaken it for pressure and run from the very answer you once begged for. But now the Lord is preparing you to recognize His movement when it comes. Even if it does not look how you imagined, a suddenly may arrive as one unexpected call, one conversation, one opening, one divine connection, one instruction that appears simple but changes the direction of everything. It may happen in a week that what could not move for years begins to shift all at once. That is not an exaggeration. That is how God restores time. He can compress what seemed endlessly delayed into a moment of divine release. But hear this with seriousness when the door opens. You cannot stand there paralyzed by the memory of old disappointments. When the river parts, you cannot keep talking like it never will. When God says now, you cannot answer Him with the language of your former season. This is why the wilderness had to teach you obedience under pressure. This is why the silence had to teach you discernment. This is why the delay had to expose every place in you that still bowed to fear. Because when the suddenly begins, heaven will not slow down to match your hesitation. God is not preparing to tease you with possibility. He is preparing to confront everything that said your life would stay stuck. And nowhere will that become more serious than in the relationships attached to your destiny. What God is preparing in this area is not shallow romance, not temporary relief, and not an emotional distraction to make the waiting easier. This is about covenant. It is about alignment. It is about who will stand beside you when the weight of your calling becomes visible. That is why this part of your life has felt so painful. You watched others find love, build homes, post their joy, and step into the kind of companionship you once believed would have happened for you by now. And if you are honest, part of the ache was not just loneliness, it was confusion. You wondered why something that seemed so natural, so simple for others, became such a battlefield in your own story. But the Lord is confronting that pain with truth. The delay was not proof that you were unwanted. It was proof that heaven refused to hand you over to what could not carry the assignment on your life. Ruth did not arrive in Boaz's field by random chance. What looked ordinary on the surface was divine arrangement underneath. God was already weaving provision, protection, timing, and covenant together before either of them could see the full picture. That is the pattern over your life. You are not being asked to chase what is real. You are being prepared to recognize what God has ordained. And that requires more than chemistry. It requires healing. It requires maturity. It requires spiritual weight. The wrong relationship can do more than break your heart. It can drain your discernment, confuse your identity, weaken your prayer life, distort your standards, and tie your future to someone who has no capacity to honor where God is taking you. That is why some relationships had to collapse. That is why some almost connections fell apart at the edge of becoming something serious. That is why some doors in love closed so sharply it left you stunned. It was not always punishment. Sometimes it was rescue. Sometimes it was the mercy of God cutting off what your emotions were willing to tolerate but your destiny could not survive. The Lord is not writing a rushed love story for you. He is guarding a covenant that must be strong enough to carry warfare, purpose, sacrifice, obedience, and glory. He is not merely preparing someone to admire you. He is preparing someone who can stand with you, pray with you, build with you, endure with you, and remain faithful when the cost of obedience gets high. And while He has been working on you, He has also been working on them. He has been confronting their immaturity, exposing their patterns, purifying their motives, and teaching them what love looks like when it is submitted to God instead of driven by need. So, do not call it absence when heaven calls it preparation. Do not call it rejection when God calls it protection. The delay here has been severe because the covenant attached to your life is costly. And if God has guarded this part of your story so carefully, then you need to understand something deeper. His restoration was never meant to stop at relationships alone. If you feel God exposing the truth about covenant in your life, then respond right now. Come on. God is guarding my covenant. Or declare, I will not settle for less than God's will. Let that be your public agreement with what heaven is doing behind the scenes. Like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone whose heart has been wounded by broken relationships. Because they need to know that some endings were not rejection, they were rescue. Stay with me, because what comes next is bigger than love alone. God is about to speak over every other area of your life. This word does not stop at relationships, because heaven is not restoring one corner of your life while leaving the rest in ruins. God is dealing with the whole structure. He is touching your finances, your health, your calling, your work, your daily bread, and the private areas where you have quietly wondered whether anything will ever move again. Some have been grieving over love, but others have been grieving over bills, exhausted bodies, stalled careers, and dreams that once burned brightly but now feel buried under survival. Yet the Lord says none of those places are beneath His attention. None of them have been marked miscellaneous in heaven. Every closed area has been seen. Every delayed area has been measured. Every weak area is under the hand of God. Think of the widow of Zarephath. She was not standing in abundance. She was standing at the edge of depletion, holding almost nothing, preparing for what she thought would be the end. But when the word of the Lord met her in that place, scarcity did not have the final say. God did not merely give her comfort for the day. He sustained her through a season that should have crushed her. That is how heaven works. The Lord does not always begin by giving excess. He begins by reordering trust. He teaches you to stop bowing to what looks empty and start responding to what He has spoken. For many, the delay in provision was not just about money. It was about training your spirit not to worship stability more than obedience. For many, the delay in healing was not just about the body. It was about God exposing inner exhaustion, accumulated grief, hidden stress, and patterns that could not be carried into the next season untouched. For many, the delay in calling was not because you missed your destiny. It was because heaven refused to let you build your life on the wrong foundation, in the wrong room, with the wrong motives. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "You can't get second things by putting them first." That is the tension so many have lived through. You wanted the breakthrough, but God wanted the order. You wanted the answer, but He wanted the alignment. You wanted the open door, but He was restoring the inner structure that would keep you from collapsing after you walked through it. So hear this now. God is not withholding to destroy you. He is arranging, correcting, and preparing to release what fits His purpose for your life. And if so many areas have felt under pressure at once, then you must understand why the attack has felt so targeted. The intensity of what has come against you was never random, and it was never small. There is a reason the pressure felt targeted. The fatigue felt unusual. The discouragement felt heavy. And the battles seemed to rise all at once from different directions. It is because the enemy does not react most violently to what is empty. Darkness responds when something is being built. Look at Nehemiah. The moment he began rebuilding the wall, opposition intensified. The resistance did not prove he was outside the will of God. It proved he was threatening something the enemy wanted to keep in ruins. That is the pattern over your life. The warfare increased because restoration was rising. The attacks sharpened because structure was being rebuilt. The voices grew louder because the wall was going up again. Some of what you have faced was not merely emotional strain. It was strategic interference, confusion at the wrong time, weariness at the wrong time, offense at the wrong time, temptation at the wrong time, delays, misunderstandings, mental fog, strange heaviness, and the urge to withdraw right when heaven was calling you to stay alert. That is how the enemy works. He looks for the vulnerable moment before breakthrough and tries to make you step back, go numb, lose language, lose focus, and interpret pressure as failure. But pressure is not always failure. Sometimes pressure means you are standing at the edge of construction that hell can already see. That is why you cannot read this season through natural eyes alone. If you do, you will mistake resistance for defeat. You will call warfare abandonment. You will think the increase in pressure means God is absent, when in reality, the increase may mean you are closer than ever to movement. Nehemiah did not stop building because the threats got louder. He built with greater vigilance. One hand worked. One hand stayed ready. That is the posture being formed in you now. God is not only bringing you through this battle, He is teaching your hands how to war and your spirit how to remain steady under assault. He is building discernment where naivete once lived. He is building endurance where you once broke quickly. He is building authority in the very place the enemy tried to produce collapse. So no, this battle is not proof that your life is cursed. It is proof that something on your life matters. Something in your future carries consequence. Something in your obedience threatens darkness more than you realize. And if you stand in this hour without surrendering your peace, your purity, your courage, or your yes to God, you will not leave this season empty-handed. You will leave carrying weight, sight, and spiritual authority you did not have before. That is why the pressure intensified, not because God stepped back, but because the wall is rising, and when the wall rises,